Alors, bonsoir et bienvenue à la 12e conférence de la filière d'architecture du semestre printemps. Après l'excellente conférence de Laurent Guidetti il y a quelques semaines, nous allons ce soir adresser une autre question clé de la durabilité qui est celle de l'énergie à l'échelle urbaine. Pour ceci, nous avons le plaisir de vous présenter ce soir la conférence de Sascha Roesler qui aura lieu en anglais, je ne sais pas si c'était indiqué, et ainsi que le vernissage de l'exposition homonyme The City as Energy Landscape. Cette exposition a été présentée pour la première fois à l'Accademia d'Arquitectura de Mendrisio en septembre 2020 et nous nous réjouissons de finalement la présenter à l'HEIA Fribourg après ces années de réduction d'activité en raison de Covid et de plusieurs échanges avec Sascha et son équipe voilà, au long de ces dernières années. Nous regrettons que Sascha ne puisse pas être à Fribourg ce soir, aussi toujours en raison de Covid, et lui remercions vivement sa participation à distance. J'ai eu le plaisir de rencontrer Sascha pour la première fois il y a 5 ans, lors de son intervention dans un séminaire au Joint Master ici à l'HEIA, un séminaire organisé conjointement avec François Esquivier, et me réjouis vraiment de l'accueillir à nouveau chez nous. Sascha est architecte, théoricien et chercheur, et il a obtenu son diplôme d'architecte et son doctorat à l'ETH de Zurich. De 2013 à 2015, il a été chercheur je ne sais pas si vous connaissez, un laboratoire de l'ETH de Zurich à Singapour qui s'appelle le Future Cities Laboratory. De 2015 à 2021, il a été le Professor for Architecture and Theory, le Swiss National Science Foundation Professor for Architecture and Theory à l'Accademia d'Arquitectura de Mendrisio, et actuellement, il est toujours à l'Accademia d'Arquitectura de Mendrisio, professeur associé de Theory of Urbanization and Urban Environment. Je trouve le travail de Sascha extrêmement intéressant et vous invite vivement à le découvrir si vous ne le connaissez pas, par son approche interdisciplinaire au croisement entre l'architecture, l'ethnographie et les sciences, et par son regard attentif et précis vers l'architecture vernaculaire, tant traditionnelle que contemporaine, pour adresser des questions liées à la durabilité, à l'énergie et au climat. Parmi ses publications, il y a Belle Construction de 2013, qui était la première publication qui proposait une histoire globale de la relation entre architecture et ethnographie. Habitat marocain en 2015, publié par Books, et en 2018, The Urban Microclimate as Artifact. L'exposition qu'on vous présente ce soir et la conférence de Sascha analyse la notion de paysage d'énergie, d'energy landscape, pour remettre en question notre compréhension de l'énergie en tant que ressource bon marché et abondante. Il présente des concepts et des méthodes pour concevoir les paysages énergétiques du futur, pas qu'à l'échelle du bâtiment, mais aussi à l'échelle de la ville, et en analysant la région de Genève comme un cas d'étude. Nous avons aussi le plaisir d'accueillir Lionel Épinay, ici présent, qui est architecte par l'ETH de Zurich et aussi docteur. Il a obtenu son PhD avec le professeur Sascha Roesler à l'Accademia de Mendrisio, et dont son travail est aussi centré sur des questions énergétiques et climatiques dans les métropoles de l'hémisphère sud, plus spécifiquement au Chili. Nous allons commencer avec la conférence et j'inviterai Lionel ensuite à faire une petite introduction de l'exposition avant de monter et aussi de partager un petit apéro. Thank you very much, Sascha. It's a pleasure to welcome you tonight. So the floor, or rather the screen, is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Isabel. I will immediately share my screen. So I will hope you can see this. So thanks again, Isabel. It's really a pleasure, at least remotely, to be with you. I would like to first of all express my gratitude that I have the opportunity to speak to you remotely, at least. I regret, of course, to not being with you tonight. I also would like to say thank you to Eric Dilbury, who also supported this exhibition, and of course also Javan Cardona, who supported us now making this really happen. So I think there will be, of course, there will be an opportunity with Lionel Epinay later to discuss the exhibition more thoroughly, but I would like to introduce this notion of energy landscape, which has, from our point of view, a growing importance in architecture to think about energy on other scales, also on urban scales. And what I'm going to do now is to really introduce our approach, so to speak. We started to discuss this notion in the context of seminars that we offered in Mendrisio in 2018, a seminar entitled To Modernize or to Ecologize Patterns of Urbanization in China Today, where we discussed the issue of rapid urbanization in China and the question of sustainability associated with it. Is it possible to also introduce a more sustainable way to build, to design under those conditions? And then 1 year later, a first seminar with this specific title, The City as Energy Landscape, where we try to outline also a theoretical approach, right, to how can we grasp, how can we understand this particular notion. And then again, 2 years or 1.5 years later, the exhibition in Mendrisio, and this is now a view of this exhibition, the original exhibition, with also with the showcases, where we really try to highlight our attempt to address energy concerns as design concerns. So I think it's really about addressing energy in architecture in a different manner, of course, on other scales, but also as a design issue. And looking at the layout, the original layout, it's an L-shaped corridor in Mendrisio where the exhibition took place. You see the basic structure of the exhibition that we also now show in Fribourg. It basically comprises 2 parts, a theory part here, and then another part highlighting our main case study, which is Geneva. And then additionally, we added some slideshows and movies, which have also partially entered in the exhibition in Fribourg. For instance, a movie by Peter Rainer Benham on Los Angeles, or a movie on urban climate issues and urban development in Stuttgart. And we also showed a slideshow with photos taken by urban scholar André Corbeau. You probably know him. He was professor of urban history at ETH, and interestingly enough, his estate came to Mendrisio meanwhile. And André Corbeau was writing a very influential paper, which some of you might know, The Territory as Palimpsest, or The Land as Palimpsest. And I think also our idea of energy landscape in a certain way resonates, this idea to explore and to understand energy landscape as multi-layered palimpsest, as spatial entities. And I think this was also, let's say, an important starting point for our general approach. Maybe another last comment to our general theoretical assumptions. Of course, when it comes to energy infrastructure is very much in the center of the debate. So a global network, we could say, of supply lines in combination with building services. But we believe we have to complement this view with a more precise understanding of the natural forces found on particular site or in a particular region, let's say, also the urban nature in close combination with the urban fabric. So we call this the energy commons. And combined, we could explore, or as an integrated approach, we could explore energy commons and energy infrastructures as energy ecologies, what we conceive as an interesting, let's say, possibility for future design research. And of course, we also seek, in terms of a methodological approach, for increased synergies among the different elements, the different, let's say, energy elements in a certain area. So this is just let's say, a rapid introduction in our main theoretical assumptions. And of course, behind it is a much larger discussion on energy transition. As you all know, we are tremendously dependent on carbon-based energy sources, natural gas, as we all know, oil and coal. And the question is, how can we replace it by renewable energy sources in the future? And just to give you two hints on really recent debates. On the one hand, a discussion started in Switzerland to cover the highways with photovoltaic, let's say, bridges, right, in order to generate or to use this, these highways also as additional infrastructure for generating renewable energy. Or, of course, also in the context of the current war in the Ukraine, we have a discussion about energy transition now in the light of a new geopolitics. We have to be more independent, and we have to be capable to produce our energy more on site, let's say, or in our own countries. So to sum up these preliminary remarks, it's about new productive energy landscapes, if you like. So here's a quote by Dean Hawkes, which also served as kind of a motto of our exhibition, and we also highlighted it here in Fribourg. So here's the quote: "The city that produces all of the energy it needs for its buildings and the urban infrastructure is, of course, only a vision. To take the first steps towards its realization would transform the agenda for research and practice in architecture more radically than any idea since the advent of the modern movement." So this is still a very programmatic statement, and it's still, of course, an open question how we can realize, how we can make this idea happen, to conceive the city as a productive energy landscape. So after these preliminary remarks, I would like to really quickly introduce with two steps in our exhibition, and at the end Lionel Epine will complement my comments, focusing more specifically on the exhibition now in Fribourg. So I start with the theory part, which kind of relies on an archaeology of knowledge, as we call it, so using an idea of Michel Foucault. So what are the main, let's say, theoretical trajectories of this notion of energy landscape? And then in a second step, I would like to present really quickly two different energy landscapes. I start with Chongqing, a city in China, and then very quickly I talk about Geneva, the case study also highlighted in the exhibition. So let me start with the theory part, and I'm now really going to show you a number of images which are also shown as slideshows in the exhibition. It was the main idea, it was like the curatorial concept, we could say, to develop a pictorial archive or a visual archive on energy, since we really believe that the visual dimensions have to be kind of redetected in order to make them fruitful as architects and designers, urban designers. So let me start talking about all the new energy landscapes. As I said, cities are worldwide striving for energy transition, and the question is, how can we integrate energy infrastructures and energy commons? We could, for instance, relate to the pre-industrial city as a model. Here's a nice quote summarizing, as I think, the traditional city, the pre-industrial city, a quote taken from Michael Hubb's book, City Form and Natural Process. So he says, groupings of houses around greens and courtyards were arranged on the basis of functional necessity to conserve heat, minimize winds, and provide access to sunlight and space. Adaptations to the constraints of nature and the inherent rightness of the siting, the relationship between rural resources and the city, and the limited energy available from sun, vegetation, and water gave the cities a stag in the countryside and determined their physical and aesthetic form. And of course, we can ask ourselves, can we still take this, let's say, pre-industrial city as a model? Here's one urban layout of the old town of Korčula in Croatia, showing a street grid blocking the cold winter winds and making them go through the streets during summer. So an urban layout taking the prevailing winds into account. But of course, the contemporary city, the city as it emerged over the course of the 20th century, and also the city of the 21st century, has a completely different logic. Energy usage is very much coined by individual buildings. We are talking about really well encapsulated, let's say, interiors with a sharp division between inside and outside, and the buildings are not really taking into account, in many cases, the ambient energy, we could say, around the buildings. And also, when it comes to theoretical debates, we are coined by, let's say, a focus on individual buildings. We could highlight, of course, Peter Rainer Banham's book, The Architecture of the Well-Tempered Environment, which talks mainly about power-operated structures or architectures, and while Hassan Fathy is, of course, highlighting structural solutions or passive solutions, but still very much focusing on individual buildings. And also the ecology movement is very much coined by ideas of self-sufficiency, by ideas on the autonomy of individual housing without taking the bad city here in the back of this cover, taking it into account. So when it comes to energy landscape, instead of simply looking at energy of individual buildings, we have to take into account the energy hinterland, the hinterland of cities. As you all know, our urban environments are widely relying on carbon-based energy sources. In this sense, we could also say they are, our city form as such are carbon-based. There's, of course, a large debate, meanwhile, about carbon modernity in general, or modernity as carbon modernity. And here are a few images kind of showing you these dependencies on the hinterland, right, where the energy is extracted, is refined, produced, and brought to the city center. So the vision Tony Garnier developed at the beginning of the 20th century, or Hermann Sergel developing an entire energy network for Europe with an incredible proposal for a dam here in Gibraltar, kind of trying to produce large amounts of energies. And I think our current debates about solar farms in the Sahara Desert and also wind farms in Northern Europe are kind of mirroring in a certain way these very futuristic and colonial, let's say, ideas in those times. Or we could refer to Soviet Union, to Russia, Joseph Stalin's great plan for the transformation of nature. So a very comprehensive view of the world as kind of coined by large-scale infrastructures, bringing the energy sources from remote places to the city centers. And then also in the city as such, here we see kind of ideas which are again coined by infrastructures, transportation infrastructures, but also energy infrastructures, as in the case of Alvin Borealski's really a nice special issue on Chicago with the title The City as Energy System, which also inspired our work, our exhibition. So also our most iconic buildings that we maybe still admire in architecture, as Mies van der Rohe's Farnsworth House, are of course largely dependent on energy sources from remote places. Of course, these large glass panels contribute to the overheating of this building, and it has to be complemented and counterbalanced, so to speak, by air conditioning. So there's really a dialectic, and we have to think about how we assess these buildings under, let's say, through the lens, let's say, of energy landscapes and energy dependency. So we are talking about an urban scale for saving energies, and in this sense also on different scales and degrees of self-sufficiency. Let me show you a few examples. They are also highlighted in the exhibition. So this is a very early example of, let's say, a bottom-up initiative in the Lower East Side of New York in the mid-1970s by the residents who installed solar collectors. You can see them here, and the windmill on the rooftop in order to generate, of course, warm water, of course, but also electricity. And there is, of course, a certain connection to those developments, taking the new microgrids into account, which are established in Brooklyn, of course, now using new technologies such as blockchain for clearing. So again, the idea of being independent from large energy services and companies. And of course, we also have to emphasize the political dimensions when it comes to renewable energy sources. This is the dedication of the solar hot water system on the White House by President Carter. And as you might know, this solar, of course, it was programmatic to install it on the White House. And right after President Reagan took over the power, he removed this system. So there's also, of course, an important political dimension behind energy landscapes. And here's another vision of this, let's say, autonomous status and also maybe a new type of urbanity producing the energy on site, a very early example highlighting technologies which are still very much debated and relevant, as you can see here. And of course, also new scientific means are so important to assess the ambient energy, the urban climatic conditions, the natural forces found in a city. So this is an image of the Environmental Simulation Lab at Berkeley, investigating the wind profiles in San Francisco. So of course these have been also important developments since the 1960s and 70s, new scientific means to understand the energy commons, if you like, of a city. Also attempts to represent the natural forces found in cities, or here an example of an early urban climatic map for planning purposes showing the microclimatic diversity that is always existing in a particular area. So to maybe relate also the issue of energy more closely also to questions of urbanization and to settlement structures, let me quickly give you some hints on, let's say, two directions which are important from our point of view. We could recall them a non-figurative type of urbanism versus a figurative type of urbanism. This is a term by Charles Waldheim. And again, it's about the question of decentralization and increased integration of energy infrastructures. So here's the line of the non-figurative type of urbanism as highlighted, for instance, by Ludwig Hildesheimer in his famous book, The New City. So kind of a new type of urbanism beyond, let's say, the dichotomy of the rural and the urban, coined by large-scale infrastructures. We could also refer to Andrea Brancis and Archizoom's work, again highlighting kind of the idea of a non-stop city or an agrarian type of urbanism, which is productive on site, right, and not depending on areas far away. Or Kishio Kurokawa's agricultural city, coined by a megastructure, and again, of course, by farmland, like an elevated type, a lifted type of living. And also Vittorio Gregotti's University of Calabria is kind of highlighting a large-scale infrastructure as the backbone, crossing the landscape and kind of providing views and access also to different facilities of the university. So this would be kind of a non-figurative type of urbanism. Also this, of course, speculative proposal for a forest cube crossed by the Golden Gate Bridge proposed by Superstudio can be conceived as such a type of urbanism. And then on the other hand, a figurative type of urbanism also dealing with ambient energies. For instance, Peter Barron's proposal for a new type of city highlighting pyramids and providing as like terraced houses, pyramids which provide as much solar access as possible. The pyramids are even shifted, so really to provide access and to provide cross ventilation in the city. Or we could refer to Ernst Egli, who explored different urban models, if you like, in different parts of the world, in different climatic zones, for arid zones and Arctic zones in this case. So really exploring the implication of certain climatic conditions for urban development. Or Ralph Erskine at the same time also exploring, of course, this topic of the subarctic habitat, highlighting this very compact type of urban environment in a harsh climate, in a very cold climate. And also Hermann Czech's sophisticated proposal for Vienna, again, a terraced, a stepped structure, large blocks with different levels, again, kind of providing outdoor spaces, direct access to sunlight, but also providing mutual shading. I think these are interesting proposals which should be reconsidered today. Again, of course, a figurative type of urbanism, and then in a very systematic manner, Ralph Knowles' exploration of this topic of solar accessibility. He did this together with his students in a Los Angeles context. So the main idea was really to provide as much access to sunlight, or an equal access, let's say, to sunlight for all the individual buildings. So there is kind of an ongoing debate since the 1970s, which explores the mutual implications, let's say, between settlement structures and the system of heat supply. And I think it's interesting and relevant to again re-explore this, let's say, urban dimensions of energy provisions today. So after this short overview on, let's say, our archaeological explorations of this topic of course, of an ecological type of urbanism, if you like, I would like to give you two examples now. I would like to highlight very quickly two energy landscapes, very different ones. They both has been very important in our research of the last few years. We had particularly 4 cities that were in the center of our interests. Besides Geneva, it was the city of Chongqing, then Cairo, and Santiago de Chile was explored by Lionel Epine in the frame of his PhD. So let me quickly give you some hints on Chongqing and Geneva to kind of maybe complement this introduction. So this is a view of Chongqing, a really a big city, a metropolis, one of the new metropolis of China. It's a city in the southern part of China where heating infrastructures are not foreseen officially, although quite cold winters are experienced in those areas. So it's really a city widely built without heating infrastructures, and also until recently without insulation. And we were interested how people deal with the lack of heating infrastructures. And I think this type of heating practices that result are, of course, also are gaining new relevance in the current, in the context of the current debates of energy transition in Europe due to the current war in the Ukraine. So China decided in the mid-1950s to divide the country. Only in the northern part of the country, heating infrastructures were provided based on district heating networks, and in the entire south, no heating infrastructure were installed. And as you can see, cities like Shanghai, Wuhan, Chengdu, and also Chongqing were affected and had to live with this political decision. So a really national-wide decision which coined, let's say, the energy landscapes of the individual cities. And on the internet, you would find many cartoons like those showing the winter in a northern Chinese city and in a southern Chinese city. So in the northern part, people are even sweating. Sometimes the rooms are even too hot, and the boy here is eating an ice cream, and while in the south, people are really freezing due to the lack of heating infrastructures. And sometimes it's even snowing. This is an image from 2013, Shanghai. So people are here have no insulated outdoor walls and no heatings officially. So people have to find, of course, their own ways, and they do this depending on their individual income. So they have, let's say, room-dependent solutions, so air conditioner, blowing warm air in different places, or infrared heaters, thermos, etc. So many electric blankets. There are many different solutions which are more focusing on, let's say, the body than the entire apartment, or let's say an individual room, let's say, instead of the entire apartment. So here is somebody working in Chongqing and using a small heater under the working table. So we did extensive ethnographic work also as part of our research. Madeleine Kobi, one of our former team members, was exploring the city of Chongqing. And so here is a infrared heater, and people are wearing a really quilted outdoor dress also to go inside and outside, so that there's almost no temperature difference between being within or without, or out, being indoors or outdoors of an apartment. And of course, as I said, depending on the income, richer people start also to build on the floor heating system, and this contributes, of course, to the increase of electricity consumption in southern China. And as you all know, China is still very much dependent on coal as the basis of electricity, but of course also hydropower plays an increasing role. This is the famous Three Gorges Dam not so far away from Chongqing, also contributing to the energy provision. And as you can imagine, also with very problematic dimensions, there was, of course, a huge resettlement program taking place in the context of building this dam. There's a transformation of the hydro ecosystems of the Yangtze River. So there are many dimensions that have to be discussed in the context of these new energy landscapes. So really having both national and very localized, very room-specific dimensions. So this is Chongqing, and now to end up, I would like to focus finally on Geneva as the case study of our exhibition and another case study of our long-term research project. Geneva is, of course, coined by the availability and the existence of water, the lake, but also the rivers. Here's a photo by taken by André Corbeau, by the way, also shown in the exhibition. And in order to kind of to describe the energy provision of the city, and also to highlight also the role and the relevance of water in Geneva, we developed three maps, basically highlighting on the one hand, the basic energy infrastructures, and also how these infrastructures contributed, of course, to the logic of urban development. We combined these mappings with the pictorial archive that I already mentioned. So we try to show how certain infrastructures, of course, influenced the tourism on site, but also urban development, the airport as an important transportation infrastructure, and also energy infrastructure being so important for the international character of the city. And then also here an early stage of CERN in the neighborhood of Geneva, as you know. And then, of course, in the city center, again, the energy infrastructures, transportation infrastructure, and the connectedness to urban development, to specific quarters even. Then another map is highlighting the energy commons of Geneva, where we also tried to highlight the energy potential, which is of course not really used so far. So the blue and green landscape corridors, then the potential for waste recovery, the potential for biogas, the potential for natural gas, and also geothermal zones and hydrothermal zones are mapped. And again, also combined with an archive highlighting really, I think, beautiful historical views of the natural environment, the topographical structure of the canton of Geneva. And then, of course, important steps developed in the city to develop a green network by Breyer, for instance. And last but not least, then also an attempt to show the water ecologies of Geneva, or the integrated water ecologies, both showing also the relevance of the river and the lake for urban development, and also most recent developments using the lake as a heat source via heat pumps to heat and cool certain areas in the city. And again, here you can see how the river influenced, let's say, the industrialization of Geneva, how factories started to use the river for energy production for the new factories. And then, of course, also the shift maybe to a touristic view of water in the 20th century, focusing more, let's say, on the lake with also an aesthetic account. And then, as I said, most recently, attempts to reconsider the lake as an energy source, both in terms of climate adaptation, but also related, of course, to the energy transition of the city. So I would like to end with really very short summary. So we want to highlight the idea of energy landscape as a maybe spatial understanding what constitutes the energy landscape of the contemporary city. So it's really about an approach of designing architects, I would say. It's of course about highlighting an urban scale of climate control and energy conservation, and also an attempt to kind of overstep a limited view of energy through the lens of purely technical infrastructure. So it's about a synergetic relationship between the elements of the built environment, what we think is important, the unseen components that shape the urban climate, and so on and so forth. And if you are interested, we are currently preparing 2 books where this view is, of course, highlighted more in detail. So energy landscapes are formed by energy infrastructures and energy commons. And I think this is my last slide. Of course, there are educational omissions at architectural schools. What I at least think, there is a need to kind of provide an integrated understanding of climate adaptation and energy transition. This is one and the same process. It's also about a dialectical understanding between inside and outside environmental conditions, overcoming the one-sided focus on well-tempered environments on the one hand, interiors or meteorology and urban design on the other hand. So all in all, it's really about making energy again a question of design. And this is it from my side now. I don't know how many people in the audience are, or if there are any questions. Otherwise, we can also move on to the additional comments by Lionel Epine. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Sascha. You can hear me, right?
Yes, I can hear you.
So, is there any questions? You can ask in French if you want. Vous pouvez parler en français. Yes.
I start. Thank you very much, Sascha, for this very interesting and lecture. And I really appreciate in your work, I didn't say it in the introduction, really this link between the theoretical background and understanding of contemporary phenomena, and then the study of a specific cases study with a global approach, with very difference between different contexts. Now I have maybe some questions or reflections. Maybe the first one, I was really interested by this idea of energy commons. So I would like to, for example, the plan that you show of the energy commons of Geneva. This is something that you develop for your research, or are there other examples in other cities of this kind of maps? Because I was wondering, every city in the world should have this map of energy commons, no, as a basic principle to start thinking about any urban project. Is this something that existing, or something that you develop in the research?
No, well, I think on the one hand, we certainly developed this in the framework of our research. On the other hand, I think this is, of course, meanwhile, a very broad interest of many cities and researchers, administrations of cities and researchers on a global scale. So I don't believe that we are the only ones, let's say, trying to map, right, the renewable energy sources of a city. Nevertheless, I think, let's say, the engineering view, the mapping of the MER sources is just a first step, and we always have to link it also with questions of urban design and architecture. And I think this is what has to be done, I think, by architects and architectural scholars, and also developed at the individual architecture faculties. So I would consider it as a joint effort, meanwhile, of many people, and we are certainly, let's say, one group of researchers trying to do this.
Okay. And then another question. At the end, you mentioned this also very interesting idea, the energy concerns as design concerns.
Yes.
Your just to, I'm not sure if I'm right. Your let's say professorship at Mendrisio is a theoretical chair, no? Right, not design studio. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
But do you see at Mendrisio or elsewhere also a growing interest or interesting examples of how to apply this energy concern as design concerns in the design studios in the School of Architecture?
I think so, yes. I mean, I can only speak for myself. I think it's also maybe a question of generation, let's say. I think for younger teachers, for younger professors, it seems to be easier to connect to these questions, I think. And we are, I would say, really at the intersection, you know, between theory and application in design processes. So that's why I always try to also show the possibility within design processes, what we discuss in theoretical terms, let's say. But I think it's really necessary to find a kind of a joint effort at the schools to combine theoretical considerations, which is also necessary with really precise design proposals. I think that this could be an interesting long-term project for many schools.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sascha, for this very interesting lecture. I have a question that goes a little bit in the direction of what Isabel told. It's about this energy commons also. So what I found it very interesting, you showed that on one hand you have these initiatives of having the autonomous house, which were the beginning of these energy considerations. And now I think we really have to think about a more common discussion about the energy. And so I think shouldn't this also lead to some new urban plannings or more general urban rules? I think about, for example, how to use, where to install solar panels on the roofs, and you should not only install this on a roof. So how to decide if an individual owner has to install it or not? I think there is need for new government also in this kind of planning.
Absolutely, this is a very good comment. I fully agree, and I really believe the architects are currently lacking also in this debate about energy transition, right? I of course also see current discussions about photovoltaic covering the outdoor facades, right? So really focusing on, again, on the individual building and to conceive it as kind of the house as a power plant, we could say, right? As a power generating plant. But I think we should indeed overstep this limited view and also include now this really even territorial ideas of covering highways, for instance, which I definitely welcome. So I think there are many better places in Switzerland to put photovoltaic than on the facade, I would say, in many cases. But it also has to be explored in a certain way, right? Also aesthetically at the end. And it should lead, as you said, to new types of governance or new rules, new regulations at the end. But probably the schools are important, let's say, players or agencies to address these topics. So the different scales of producing energy in a certain region or even in the entire country. So yes, I think that's an important question.
D'autres questions? Ok, Lionel, tu veux continuer? Je veux dire 2 mots.
S'il y a beaucoup de choses à ajouter, je repasse en français. It's okay for you, you can understand me. Je ne sais pas s'il y a beaucoup de choses à ajouter, si je ne veux pas répéter Sacha pour introduire l'exposition. Tout a été dit. You showed too much, Sacha, too many spoilers in your teaser. Non, mais juste réitérer remerciements à la Haute École pour nous donner cette opportunité de exporter l'exposition dans une version allégée, peut-être, on va dire version condensée, mais les thématiques sont celles dont Sacha a parlé. Du coup, je ne vais pas faire le guide de l'exposition, je vais vous laisser découvrir tout seul par vous-même. C'est très simple, il n'y a pas beaucoup de... C'est composé de 3 tables et le principal focus est sur Genève. Du coup, ces cartes dont Sacha a déjà parlé, qui se concentrent sur ces différentes notions d'infrastructure, de commons, on pourrait traduire par force ou ressources naturelles, disons, en français, et l'eau, qui est très important dans le cas de Genève. Et du coup, ces cartes essaient de résumer les énergies présentes, mais aussi les énergies potentielles pour le futur de Genève. Et en parallèle à ça, dont Sacha a aussi introduit, cette importance d'avoir aussi une partie visuelle, enfin, cette archive visuelle qui nous permet de savoir d'où vient cette notion. Historiquement, ça ne sort pas de nulle part, c'est pas été inventé par Sacha. Enfin, le terme a toujours été là, et il faut voir qu'il y a des exemples architecturaux qui traitaient déjà de cette question, mais qui n'étaient forcément pas dans les mêmes, le même but qu'on a maintenant, maintenant dans une urgence climatique qui fait qu'on essaie de répondre à ces questions, mais on peut quand même regarder ces exemples historiques, ces exemples d'urbanisme qui traitaient déjà ces questions, d'utiliser la topographie pour essayer d'améliorer les conditions environnementales du lieu. On peut déjà les voir comme des bases pour développer aussi des techniques futures qui justement ne se concentrent pas sur le seul bâtiment, l'enveloppe du bâtiment, mais sur tout son environnement aussi proche. Et c'est ça qui est très important, c'est de voir cette échelle urbaine. Et une partie qui n'est pas dans l'exposition, et je suis content que Sacha ait parlé, c'est aussi toute la partie des pratiques humaines et sociales qui sont plus à l'échelle du corps, disons. Tous ces exemples en Chine de vêtements et de petits appareils individuels sont aussi une thématique importante, mais qui sont effectivement à une autre échelle, qui ne font pas partie de l'exposition. Et sinon, qu'est-ce que je peux rajouter d'autre? Oui, dans cette archive visuelle, il y a aussi des vidéos qui viennent du coup de la collection André Corbeau, qui permettent en plus des cartes de Genève, de voir vraiment quelle est l'expression du patrimoine bâti, quelle est la topographie, quelle est l'hydrologie de Genève. Et en parallèle, il y a aussi donc, ces petits films, Sacha a aussi donné la liste, qui démontrent des exemples d'infrastructures qu'on connaît bien, Banham qui se balade en voiture à Los Angeles, qui traverse ces 4 écologies, la plage, les collines, le bassin et j'oublie le 4e, l'autoroute évidemment. Et du coup ça en parallèle. Évidemment c'est pas du tout le même contexte que le contexte de Genevois, mais on peut tirer quand même des parallèles et on essaye d'avoir justement cette collection d'exemples visuels pour essayer de complémenter et peut-être inspirer aussi. Et voilà, non, je vous laisse découvrir. Merci encore à Isabelle et Diavan pour l'aide aujourd'hui.
Oui.
Merci. Non, on a passé en français, j'espère que ça va. Non, en fait, moi, ça me fait penser, ça m'intéresse beaucoup aussi. Je suis aussi très intéressée à cette question des ressources et de l'échelle des ressources. Parce qu'en fait, ça me fait penser au principe de la permaculture, dont le premier principe de permaculture, c'est de retrouver les ressources à partir d'un lieu, mais c'est évidemment individuel, à une échelle beaucoup plus petite, et de trouver quelles sont les ressources et à quelle distance elles se trouvent, et d'organiser le design des plantations et de ce qu'on va manger, parce que c'est ça dans la permaculture, autour de l'habitat de manière rationnelle et efficace. Donc c'est pas du tout... la permaculture, c'est hyper précis, hein, ça se passe au centimètre pratiquement. Hein. Et donc, voilà. Et je trouve que c'est super intéressant d'imaginer qu'on applique presque la même théorie, mais à la ville. La question que je voulais vous poser, c'est comment est-ce que vous déterminez le cadrage auquel il faut, sur lequel on se base, l'échelle à laquelle on va regarder où on trouve les ressources. Parce qu'en fait, Genève, par exemple, si on prend l'exemple de Genève, bénéficie aussi de l'électricité, certainement des centrales nucléaires françaises, mais aussi des barrages suisses, donc qui ne se trouvent pas tout proche de Genève. Donc en fait, comment vous décidez du cadrage sur lequel vous allez déterminer où vous trouvez les ressources pour Genève? Est-ce que vous comprenez ma question?
Maybe, I mean, I hope I understood the question right, but I mean, it's of course at the end the city administration which has to find answers, but I think researchers can maybe highlight the different scales also of units that you mentioned. So how can we combine individual, let's say, microgrids with larger units? That would be again be an important question that has to be tackled or addressed also. And so to identify the different scales is an important task, and we can contribute as researchers to the identification. I think the clarification also of these different groups. I don't know, maybe Lionel, do you want to complement?
Yes, maybe, yeah, I switched to English. Yeah, it's an important question, this, let's say, definition of the territory. What do you take into consideration? Do you go supranational and try to, I don't know, it's then a question of governance anyway, as you're saying, Sascha, it's the scale of the city administration, or is it the scale of it can be at the canton also in Switzerland. But then, yeah, the type of governance then will also influence the type of energy available, because now if you say, okay, we want to cut, I don't know, it's just a hypothetical scenario, but let's say we want to cut ourselves from nuclear power, so we get rid of a bit of a dependency upon France, as you're saying in your example. Then where do you go looking for other sources of energy if you are constrained by the city limits, or are you trying to define other territories or to make some synergies between cities that you can offset? Or it has to come hand in hand with new governance. You cannot just say, okay, energy is there, I go grab it. So yeah, it's highly political as well. So I don't know if the architect alone can really pinpoint the right scale and decide, because he has not all the power for this. Yeah, he's one of the actors, but yeah. So
I would have another question, please. If I'm right, I think you also participated on a project about Geneva, where you imagined Geneva, or the future of Geneva. Could you say something about how your work influenced the vision of Geneva in the future? I would be very interested in this, also to give some hints or tools for architects to how to work. Yes. I don't know if it's too fast now to speak about this in the end of this conference, but
frankly, I can't say a lot about it because my contribution was mainly the theoretical input and also the theoretical framing based on this idea of energy landscape. This was also the title of our contribution, but then it was much more, let's say, developed by Oscar Busson, who was kind of the main architect of the team, and let's say our relevance was less, let's say, important than at the beginning of the competition. So I think, yeah, I can't say a lot right now to additionally what I have now presented in this lecture.
Thank you very much.
So no more questions? Ah, yes, one.
I had a question about the fact that we speak a lot about energy production, and as we are maybe more like small-scale designers as architects, I was wondering how we could really act on energy consumption, and if the principal problem is related to people habits, like how we are used to live, which comfort we used to live, or are the principal problem our laws, or like in Switzerland we have very strict laws. And I was wondering, yeah, as architects, if we can act, because energy transition is something that should maybe be fast, I think. And I was wondering if we can, like, on smaller scale, act quickly on energy consumption in houses, for example.
You mean if we can influence the habits of the users and residents?
Yeah, I was wondering.
More on a technological level?
No, I think more not on the technological level, like really on the other hand, like if the principal problem in that is habits of people, or is it laws, like how it's supposed to be designed?
Yeah. Frankly, I believe it's a very interesting time for experimentation with habits. I mean, we have 2 years of COVID behind us, living with COVID, and with new kind of types of organizing the residential space, right? Using it also as a working space. And I think it opened up many interesting discussions, also new needs, new requirements for, let's say, a new permeability, let's say, of the outdoor wall. You know, we want to be able to open the windows, and we want to go outside and maybe also work there during the summertime. So I think there is room and also a good time now for experimentation, and I really would like to encourage you also in the framework of your design proposals that you're developing now as a student, to explore new usages, new programs, and really question the old, let's say, trajectories that have been foreseen, let's say, at the end of the 20th century. So I don't know if I understand your question rightly, but I really think there are times when it's really difficult to influence society as an architect, but currently I really believe we can contribute to a positive transformation, you know, by also adding new ideas on the design level, on the level of layouts, on the programmatic level, etc. So that would be my short answer.
Thanks.
I will use this this question to ask something, because I see maybe a contradiction between we want to build more infrastructures, but at the same time I think we need to reducing our energy consumption, and I feel like this infrastructure is based on a constant growing, constantly growing, constantly keep adding more and more energy. But isn't that also another fight, I would say, to reduce instead of always thinking of adding energy?
Yeah. I mean, it's also about questioning our living standards, the standards of comfort, which have coined our residential spaces, of course, in terms of temperature profiles during winter, for instance. And as you all noticed, now there's a debate in Europe about living without heating, the necessary heating energy during winter due to the war, etc. So I think there is really an urgent need to question certain standards, also to question, do we want to heat entire apartments, for instance, or simply individual rooms, or even individual bodies, or how do we link the exterior and the interior space? So I think these are interesting questions, also maybe leading then to a certain neglect of infrastructures, additional infrastructures. Maybe you find out it's really not necessary to again add new layers. But I think, of course, both is necessary to be considered. So new types of technology on the one hand, but also new types of habits, of programs, etc.
Okay, thank you.
So I think we finished. So thank you very much, Sascha. We wish you a good recovery, and we hope to see you soon in Freiburg, physically, I hope. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much again, really, for hosting me tonight, but especially the exhibition. It's really a great pleasure that we can share our ideas and thoughts with you, and I'm pretty sure it's just a starting point for a future discussion and for more deeper exchange. So many thanks.
Okay, thank you. Good evening.
Nice evening. Yeah, enjoy the opening. Bye-bye.
Bye.